Hey everybody, and welcome to the first installment of my top 50 board games of all time for the 2021 into 2022 season. So this is the definitive list of my favourite games. So I was really in two minds this year. Was I going to do a top 100 or was I just going to do the top 50? I've settled for best of both worlds, where I'll do the top 50 in the normal format, i.e. doing 10 games at a time, and then as a final blowout I'll do my 50 to 100, or sorry, my 51 to 100 as just one big live stream, and we can talk about some analysis and what's climbed, what's fallen, and the reasons for that. So this was a really tough list to do this year because, again, just some amazing games just didn't make the cut, and it was really hard to jockey things around just to get it in the right order where I'm happy with it. But I'm happy with it now. Some truly amazing games here. And something that I say every year is I'm always surprised about how much my lists change every year, because last year I was very happy with my list, of course, and I wasn't expecting it to change so much, and it really has. You know, I've got 19 new titles in the top 50 here. That's been new to me in the last year, so a big change. You know, almost half the list is new from last year, and you know, normally that's a bit more surprising than this year because I've played so many new titles and probably more games or more new games this year than I had in probably the last 3 years combined. So let's get started with the top 50. At number 50, I have Firenze by Andrea Stedding. This was last year's number 30 and is placed as high as 26 and as low as 30. So this is actually the lowest position it's ever been in at number 50, but I don't like it any less than last year. And to be honest, if any game has fallen, it's probably not because I like it any less, it's simply because I like some new games more than it. So that's going to be a general running theme. But anyway, Firenze is a really interesting game. And it actually uses one of my favourite mechanisms in all of board gaming, where the more you neglect something, the more the incentive to take that is. And in this case, it's going to be these cards which work on this sliding scale, and you're basically trying to acquire these cards not only for the powers on those cards, which can let you do some really cool things, give you some kind of engine building benefits, or even some really nasty take that benefits, but also you're taking those cards based on the bricks on those cards, because the idea of this game is you're building these towers of different colours, and these different coloured bricks range in their kind of scarcity. You know, some of them are really rare, which is going to give you more points depending on how high you build those towers, and some of them are a bit more common. But it's simply just take one of these cards, and basically the first one in that row is going to be free, but the further you want to go along this row to collect cards further away from you, you're going to have to deposit a brick to build up the incentive of the ones lower. And I really like that system, and this is probably one of the best examples of that mechanism being used correctly. A really interesting game, very streamlined. And one of the things, you know, I really take away from this game is, yes, it can feel nasty at times. So there are some pretty destructive cards here, which can pretty much just knock your opponent's towers over and stuff. But you really do have enough time to see that coming. And, you know, if someone's going to do that to you, they've probably paid quite a lot in order to do that. So it doesn't really have that idea of just people pulling the wool over your eyes and just smashing a card in your face and not having any anticipation for it. You know, they did have to pay in order to do that to you. So I do think that really does make the game feel a bit more settling for me personally. But the game works wonderfully. It has this cool racing aspect where you want to be the first to build a certain amount of towers, and you're getting points based on how high those towers are. But a wonderful game, so different and nothing else like it out there. And Andrea Stedding, a really well-rounded designer. And to be honest, this was one of the games that was on my Grail list, or my Grail games list, for a long time, because it was so hard to get hold of. There was a reprinting a couple years ago, and you know, sometimes when a level of expectation is that high, it can be really difficult for a game to live up to that hype, and this one certainly did that. It's remained on my top 50 since I've had it, and you know, just kept on that list this year. But who knows, maybe if I play it more in the following year, then it could boost up again. But still, an amazing game, a real classic feeling Euro, that is Firenze. At number 49, I have Citrus. Now, Citrus was last year's 38, so it's fallen slightly, and last year was its debut on the list. This one is another kind of throwback feeling Euro. I don't think it's tremendously old, but it feels older than what it is, but in a good way. This is a tile placement game of area majority and area control, as you are laying out these tiles of these different colours, which are representing these different orchards. And with these orchards, you're trying to build up these chains to not only surround these fincas, which are your kind of point scoring hubs, really. So they're like the area control things, where if you surround them completely, whoever's got the majority of orchards surrounding it are going to get the biggest amount of points. Whoever's got the second amount is going to get the second amount of points. But this game has one of the coolest mechanisms, in fact, a few cool mechanisms that I really don't see very often. The first of which is the way you acquire tiles in the first place. I love this, as you have this kind of cross-hatching of almost like this matrix, and at some points, it's as narrow as 2 tiles, and at some points it's as wide as 4 tiles, and you're going to have to pay a coin for each of those tiles you take on either row or column. And as people are taking tiles, things are constantly changing, so you might think, I hope you take that row, so then I can just take these 2 pink tiles and not have to worry about taking a tile I don't want. And that's really cool in the first place, but the way you lay these tiles is also interesting, because when you lay a new batch of orchards or these tiles, you're going to have to place one of your workers on there to claim that orchard is yours. But you only have, I think it's 5 or 6 of these workers to place full stop. And you really do want to leave things on the board as much as possible, because you can link these thinkers together, meaning that you can almost kill 2 birds with 1 stone with the same worker. And get loads of points just from a single worker. But at the same time, you need to make sure you have an income of money, and you only really get money by removing workers from the board and putting them onto your player board. But the fewer workers you have on your player board means that you get less money for doing so. So ideally you want to have a perfect balance of keeping workers on your player board but on the main board as well, so that not only can you manage your money but also manage your coverage on the board. An extremely clever game, one with agonizing decisions, scales remarkably well, especially for an area control game. You can play this at 2, 3 or 4 players and it works perfectly fine. I might even go to 5 players, I'm not sure. But what a game this one is. It feels classic, it feels dateless, and I still absolutely adore this one. Probably one of the most underrated games I have in my collection, and I always kind of sing from the rooftops about how great Citrus is. At number 48, I have my first debutante on the list. This is Viceroy. So Viceroy is a really interesting game as you are trying to collect these cards with this bidding mechanism. So you have these 4 different currencies represented by these different colours of these kind of jewels or gems. And you are acquiring cards by simultaneously bidding with the other players, but you can only ever bid 1 gem. And if you bid the same gem as somebody else, you basically wasted that bid and you're going to throw that away and going to go again. But if you go for different cards, then you're going to acquire these cards, you're going to add them to your hand and then potentially build them to contribute to this big pyramid of cards that you're building throughout the game. And these cards will do really cool things depending on the layer that they're built on. So on the base layer, they're probably going to get weaker abilities, but as you start building up and up and up towards that pinnacle, then they get more ramped up and stronger abilities. But at the same time, you've got to be really careful about what you're doing, because if you line things up correctly by matching the gem colours on these cards, then you almost get free income, which obviously keeps you going and keeps you being able to bid and compete for future rounds. A really nice flow and tempo to this game, very streamlined, only a couple of phases in this one, and I love the vast variety of ways you can score points in this one, because you can score points based on the level you buy things on. You can kind of combine these scrolls and these points together to really ramp up and multiply your scoring. You can try and attack other players and they have to get shields to counteract you, or they can end up losing points as well. So loads of paths to victory. A bit like Citrus as well, this one is massively flown under the radar, not nearly as popular as it should be. I think this one strikes a really great balance between being appealing to more experienced Eurogamers, as well as being relatively accessible for less experienced gamers, but still having an amazing amount of gameplay there. Gorgeous artwork, great production, and I'm really happy and still really enjoying Viceroy. At number 47, I have Power Grid. So Power Grid was last year's number 36, so a slight fall from last year, but I think a big portion of that is because I don't get to play this game very often, because it does require a bit more of a niche group to play it, and it can take longer when it comes to the higher player counts, but that doesn't detract from the gameplay experience. This is a wonderful economic game about building these power stations and trying to power up as many of these houses as you can, or these cities as you can. But I love how easily this game is broken down into different phases. The first of which is where you're trying to buy these power plants in these auctions, which is a very simple, straightforward auction. Just call in, when you want to raise the bid, you can do. But these power stations are really interesting because they all have different criteria on them, and they all require a different type of fuel. So some might say you need garbage in order to fuel this one, and if you pay 2 garbage, then you can fuel up to or at least power up to 3 cities. Or some might say you can pay to oil in order to fuel 5 cities. And this really does escalate as the game goes on. But that really ties into the next phase where you are acquiring the different resources in this really cool supply and demand mechanism. So the more and more people compete for the same type of fuel, the more expensive it's going to get. And only so much replenishes each round. So generally the needle is going to go more and more expensive as the game goes on if people keep buying that type of fuel. Or you can diversify and go to a different type of fuel and therefore get things for cheaper because you're not competing with anybody. And from then on, you are just basically trying to place these buildings onto the map, paying coins or paying your currency in order to not only establish those cities but to connect them to other ones as well. There's this real scarcity, and you want to grab the best locations because it's cheaper by getting in there first. And one of the best economic games out there, very mathematical, very dry in its approach, but that doesn't really take away from the fun of the game. You can really map things out to the amount of precision that you want to, because again it's very deterministic. You can really calculate things to the smallest degree, and when you do that and it pays off, it's very satisfying. Love this game, it scales great, and I think it's an absolute classic. That is Power Grid at number 47. At number 46, I have last year's number 31 with Luna. So this is the first of the Stefan Feld games on this list. So if you regularly watch my content, you might know that I'm a big fan of Stefan Feld. So, spoiler alert, there will be more Stefan Feld games on the list. This one, despite Stefan Feld games generally being quite weird, this one is probably one of the weirdest of them all, as you are trying to manipulate these acolytes on these different islands to get these different bonuses, with the idea of trying to almost sacrifice them to claim spots on this temple in the middle of the table. And all these different temple spots have a number assigned to them, and if you place these workers on them, or your coloured acolytes on them, then you can potentially knock off anybody surrounding that with a lower number than yours. So it really does have this kind of almost like domino effect, where if you place things, you can really affect the game state, which can obviously affect things when it comes to scoring points, because you get points based on your coverage of the main temple. But on top of all that, you've got this dynamic state where you've got this this priestess traveling around the map, and you want to be having the most acolytes on the spot where the moon priestess is, because you get more points for doing so. But you've also got this apostle which goes around, which scores you negative points for having the majority on there. So you really have to spin a lot of plates. It flows wonderfully. It's one of those games where you start the game not being able to do too much, but as you really wrap your head around things, you can start stringing bigger and bigger moves together and getting more mileage out of your turns. Very clever, but very weird, quite cerebral game, but I think it's wonderful. So yeah, one of the best Stefan Feld games, and one that doesn't really get talked about too much, but still wonderful game. That is Luna at number 46. At number 45, I have another new game, despite being an older game. This one is Tigris and Euphrates by Dr. Reiner Knizia. So this one is regarded as probably his best game and one of his more grand games in terms of its scope. There's quite a lot going on in this one, and it's definitely a change of pace from his normal quick card style games. This one is quite a confrontational area control style game, where you are trying to collect points by not only controlling these cities and adding tiles to those cities with certain colours to boost up your points in that colour, because you've got 4 different categories of scoring in this game, and are all depicted by a different colour. But only your lowest value in each of those colours at the end is going to be your final score. So if I had 5 black tokens, I had 5 red tokens, I had 4 blue tokens, and only 2 green tokens, then my final score is going to be 2, because 2 is my lowest. But I love this game, how the conflicts work, as sometimes you're joining these cities together, and if there's ever an imbalance on who's controlling those cities, then there's going to be a big blowout and a big battle where you are counting up the tiles in each of those cities, and you can potentially contribute more as well from behind your screen, and then whoever wins is going to remove an amount of tiles from the opponent, and then you're going to gain that many points. A really dynamic game. I love the way the board changes all the time. New opportunities arise. You can claim these temples, which keep points ticking in certain colours the more you control them. Just a really clever and unique design. that really hasn't been replicated other than its sister game Yellow and Yangtze, which is very similar, shares a lot of the same DNA, and if Tigris and Euphrates wasn't on those lists, then Yellow and Yangtze probably would be in its place. But I like this one slightly more because I find the combat slightly more intuitive. But a wonderful game, and I can really see this one climbing over the next year because I think it's pretty timeless. That is Tigris and Euphrates at number 45. At number 44, I have another new entry with Anno 1800 by Martin Wallace. So 2021 was really the year where I started dipping my toe into more economic games and starting to find out, these games are really my jam. And of course, Martin Wallace, this is really his field of expertise. But the thing I really take away from Anno 1800 is this idea of tech tree building. As you start off with being able to manufacture some pretty basic goods, but the more and more you invest in types of goods, you can start almost spraying out into these different, more lavish goods and building more and more distinguished goods to get more and more points and to appease more demanding customers or more demanding, settlers in your town. It works really well, a very logical flow to it. First you might be able to just make wood and then steel, and then you might be able to build some fabric, and then because you can do that, you can start building boats, and then because you can build boats, you can start sailing out into distant lands and start importing more luxury goods, or some more exotic goods I should say. And I just love this flow of this game. It all works so logically, and I love games that work like that, and I think Martin Wallace does a really good job of embedding that kind of feel into the game. This game does have a weird flow and a bit of a weird pace to it. As the more and more you build up your population in this game, you start to acquire more and more cards. So you've got to be careful when you're doing stuff. And it sometimes can feel like you're chasing your tail and not getting anywhere. But sooner or later, there will be that curve where you start getting on top of things and start smashing out these demands of these people and ultimately trigger the end of the game. But works so well, a really easy rule set to learn and understand, but still having a lot of depth in this game, loads of paths to victory, loads of things to explore. And I also like the subtle player interactions you can capitalize on your other player's town or your opponent's towns in order to use their goods and export them in or import them into your town. Really interesting game. I think there's some room for improvement here, but that being said, and it's still number 44, I think this one still has room to climb higher in future years. So at number 44, Anno 1800. At number 43, I have Hamamikoji. So Hamamikoji has actually climbed this year from number 56, but has placed as high as number 17. My journey with Hamamikoji has been quite a full-on one because this is probably one of my most played games ever. Definitely my top 5 most played games ever. This one is a very clever, very delicately balanced 2-player only game as you are trying to acquire these cards to gain the favour of these geisha girls. And if you acquire a certain amount of geisha girls or get a certain amount of points based on those geisha girls, then you're going to be the winner. But I love the way you have to manage your hand in this game by using this I split, you choose mechanism. So you might have a hand of, say, 5 cards. You're going to pick 4 of them. You're going to put them in 2 pairs of 2. Your opponent is going to take one of those pairs and you're going to get the remaining one and put them on your side of the table. Really clever. Some agonizing decisions that really do require a bit of a poker face at times. You don't want to give away your strategies. You want to be clever about which cards you're going to discard from the game because that's one of your actions. You also want to be very clever about which ones you're going to save until the end of the game for the big reveal at the end, because again, that very slight mistake in this game can cost you, but that one bit of savviness can make you win the game. So this game really is a genius design, and one way or another, this game will always be in my top 100 floating around because objectively, this game is tremendous. I do sometimes go through peaks and valleys of this game because depending on how much I play it, sometimes if I play it too much, I might get a bit burnt out and it will fall again, but then the incentive to come and play it and the desire to want to play it climbs again. So again, this one has climbed because of that reason. I haven't played it too much this year, but when I have played it, I've really enjoyed it, and I can't really fault with this game. It's perfectly designed and one of the best 2-player games ever made. That is Hamamikoji at number 43. At number 42, I have Awkward Guests. Now, this was actually last year's number 24, so quite a significant fall, and it has placed as highly as 21, but 24 was actually its lowest place that it's ever been up to this year. But I still love this game. It's still my favourite deduction game of all time. This one, it takes that classic murder mystery feel to it, almost like Cluedo-esque feel, but really does bring it into this era of board gaming, using this very intuitive, very clever deck building system, or this brilliant deck system, which you pull out a bunch of cards, and somewhere within those cards will be the answer to the murder mystery. You're only getting a few cards each round, and you're ticking things off on your sheet. Could this person have been in the murder scene? Could these people give someone else an alibi? Could they have gone this route? Were they seen by one of the maids? Could they have passed this way and picked up this weapon? And I love this real logical flow and logical puzzle of the games. You're taking things off from this blueprint of this building to work out who the culprit is. And it also has this really cool mechanism of what information am I going to share with my opponents in order to get information in return, because every bit of information has a number assigned to it, which almost shows the importance or the pertinence of that bit of evidence. So you've got to be careful about what you want to give away to your opponents, and hopefully give them stuff that they already know, or give them stuff that is not going to really help because you might have already debunked that alibi. So one of the coolest games, a great system with infinite replayability, and as I said, definitely my favourite deduction game. And if you love deduction games and you haven't played Awkward Guests yet, you are really doing yourself a disservice, because this game is phenomenal. So number 42, Awkward Guests. And at number 41, I have Babylonia by Reiner, Knizia, which is actually another new entry to this list. So this one really does take the DNA from a lot of his more classic games, such as Through the Desert, Blue Lagoon and Samurai, but really did tailor it more to my personal tastes. In this game, you basically have a hand of tiles or tokens with different symbols on them, and then all your turn is going to consist of is placing one of those tokens onto the map, with the idea of trying to surround these icons, trying to build up big networks and chains of these icons in order to score as many points as you can. You can also choose to surround these ziggurats in order to score, or in order to claim unique player powers, such as maybe being able to place a number of tiles at once, or being able to have more tokens in your immediate supply so that you can have more options and more flexibility, or even just getting a big injection of points. So I love how streamlined and how smooth this game is. Next to no rules overhead, but loads of depth, a real scarcity in getting to the best spots, and that demand of claiming a spot before your opponent gets there, because despite the board looking open at first, it does get gobbled up pretty quickly, and you really do have to choose when to prioritise doing certain things, and you really do want to do everything at once, but of course you can't do so. This one really does have the hallmarks of a game that's going to stand the test of time. It does feel like an instant classic for me, and one that's going to be evergreen for pretty much ever, because it does feel like a game of years past. But what a beautiful game this is. I adore this one. Another versatile game that's going to really appease people who've been in the hobby for a long time and love that strategic depth of a game, but still has a very low barrier to entry for anybody to play and to appreciate. So adore this game. Is going from strength to strength. That is Babylonia at number 41. So that concludes this instalment of my top 50 board games of all time. I really hope you've enjoyed the list and have found something on here that maybe you didn't even know about. So if you have enjoyed the video, please hit like and subscribe to my channel, and check out my other videos too. Alternatively, if you really want to support the channel, I do have a Patreon account, which I'll leave the links below for that one. And for everyone else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye.